answers.
Thanks very much. I wrote a presentation, so I hope you don't mind if I read it. It's a slightly longer introduction than Tina Kotek's, but I'm a lot less of a known quantity, so I hope that works for everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening, Silverton Progressives. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to address the group. Thank you, Lori Chadwick, for inviting me. I appreciate it. And thank you, Tina Kotek, for that presentation. It's a tough act for me to follow, but I'm going to do my best. So hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Smith. I am the Democratic candidate for the Oregon State House of Representatives for our local District 18. In November, I will be challenging the incumbent Republican Rick Lewis. I will talk more about him later, but first I thought I would introduce myself to you. I am most recently a full-time dad with 2 kids attending public school here in the Silver Falls. Oh, you can't see me? I have a terrible internet connection where I live, so I do appreciate it. Oh, there I am. Great. I have 2 kids attending school here in the Silver Falls School District. I have self-published several books over the years, but my main professional background is in website development. I've been building websites since 2003, and I earned an MBA in marketing from City University of Seattle in 2012. As a business person, I have learned to work with financial statements, project management workflows, complex regulations, reports, and data. But as you know, being an elected representative is about a lot more than just writing budgets. The policies that the legislature implements have a very real impact on millions of people's lives. The most important part of legislating is the ability to work with other people, to communicate, and to listen. True leadership requires the ability to see things from another person's perspective, and that's why I believe the experiences of my early life are relevant qualifications as well. Beginning when I was 15 years old, I worked for minimum wage throughout my teens and early 20s. I've painted houses, I've sewn sweatshirts, and yes, I apologize if you guys can't see me. I have a terrible internet connection. One of the things I would love to do is get better internet service to rural Oregon and to the entire state. Sorry. These messages keep popping up on my screen. Oh, you can see me, so that's good. I have painted houses, I've sewn sweatshirts, and I have flipped a whole lot of burgers. So my deeply felt personal connection to the progressive priorities of the Democratic Party is based on my own personal experience. And I am fortunate because in the years since then, I have experienced some economic upward mobility in my own life, but there are far too many people who don't have the same opportunities that I had. Even today, after all the progress we've made as a society, there are far too many people still being left out of the American dream. I believe education is the cornerstone of upward mobility. If we want people to do well in life, we must start them off with the best possible education. More than anything, this is what motivated me to get into this race. I want to see Oregon fully fund its public schools. I've got 2 kids in public school right now, and it's readily apparent just how hard the schools are struggling. And the teachers put on a brave face, you know, they do the best they can, but their resources are limited, and the teachers are experiencing burnout. I don't know if you all saw the article in the recent issue of Our Town. It said the local teachers union conducted a survey which found that the teachers are so unhappy that they're thinking of leaving their jobs. And they've been getting yelled at over mask mandates. They don't have the teaching tools and resources they need. They haven't had a pay raise in years, and they've got student loans to pay off. And meanwhile, they're teaching in very old buildings that require serious renovation. So it turns out Oregon's public education system ranks near the bottom 3rd out of all the schools in the entire country based on student performance. which is probably because we have some of the highest student to teacher ratios in the nation. And factors like those influence educational outcomes. And the outcome is we have one of the highest high school dropout rates in the nation. That's right. As of 2021, Oregon is among the 5 worst states in the entire country in terms of our high school dropout rate. And that is not how you get people started on a path to success in life. Oregon has got to do better for our public schools. And the key to better educational outcomes is better education funding. The current service level is inadequate, so we need to update the quality education model, and then we need to bring our current standards in line with that model. And I've written more about this topic on my blog if you want to visit smithfororegon.org and check it out. And I want to add at this point, I just heard former Speaker Kotek talking about how we've got this budgetary surplus and there's all this money, but I've been talking to the teachers here in Silverton and they're complaining that there's no consistency in the school's budget from one year to the next. It keeps going up and down. It's unpredictable and it makes it really hard for districts to plan ahead. So I think as long as we do experience these kinds of surpluses, we need to use some of that money to make a more consistent year-to-year budget for the school districts. Another cornerstone to improving our local economy is to pay workers a living wage. I deeply believe that everyone who works for a living should earn a living wage. Right now, we're experiencing the highest rate of inflation we've seen in decades. And the problem is wages are not keeping up. So as a society, we have a responsibility to make sure that people who work for a living are able to live on the money they earn for that work. So I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're a single mom right now, today. You're working full time and you've got a kid to support and you're earning Oregon's minimum wage, which is currently $12.75 an hour. And you add up the cost of housing and food, transportation, and mandatory insurance and utilities and taxes, and of course, childcare. And childcare is going to be one of your biggest expenses. In many places, the cost of childcare is right up there with housing. And as Kotek was just saying, it's often very difficult just to find any childcare. So now suddenly your $12.75 an hour doesn't seem like such a lot of money anymore. So you imagine that you're this single working mother earning minimum wage. And the question is, how are you supposed to save up to buy a house, set aside some money for your own retirement, and save to get ahead in life? How are you supposed to save anything when minimum wage doesn't even cover your day-to-day cost of living? The math just doesn't work out. How many roommates do you have to live with? How many relatives do you have to lean on for childcare? How many top ramen noodles do you have to eat just to not quite get by from one month to the next? So we as a society need to ensure that the minimum wage covers the cost of living. And we also need to think of creative solutions for the problems that we face as a society. For example, maybe paying the workers more is not the only answer. Maybe decreasing the cost of living is part of the answer too. So the question then becomes, how do we do that? And personally, I think the Biden administration had some great ideas in their Build Back Better framework, ideas that would have gone a long way towards addressing that question. Unfortunately, as you all know, the package bill does not seem likely to make it through Congress anytime soon, but we can still choose to implement some of those ideas right here on a state level. For example, maybe we can create publicly funded childcare programs so that working parents can afford reliable childcare services. And maybe we can subsidize farmers by creating our own Oregon state version of the Farm Bill to help bring down the cost of healthy fresh fruits and vegetables while still ensuring that the farms stay locally owned and operated, and that the farm workers and the farmers themselves are earning a fair wage for all their essential hard work. Maybe we can manage the cost of insurance by expanding the Oregon Health Plan to provide low-cost health care to all Oregonians. And some of you are real policy wonks with regards to universal health care. I'd love to talk to you some more and hear some more of your ideas on this front. And maybe we can manage the cost of housing, whether that's by building more units or buying up hotels, as Tina Kotek was just saying, or by expanding housing subsidies for low-income families, or perhaps by imposing a tax on properties owned by out-of-state speculators. These are just some ideas, but let's talk about them and let's get some stuff done and address these problems. So I briefly mentioned one of my priorities, and that is universal health care. And I know this is a cause that many of you care about deeply. In Europe, they've had universal health care for generations, and it has not been a major political issue until Boris Johnson, but that's a different story. So I know that this can work. And meanwhile, in America, we have some of the world's highest healthcare costs, and yet our healthcare outcomes are comparable to developing nations with a fraction of our infrastructure. So it's long past time to address that disconnect, and universal healthcare is the way to do that. Of course, in order for healthcare to be truly universal, it must be organized on a federal level. And I'm only running for state office. So there's a limit to what we can do on a state level. But for the time being, we're able to enact universal health care on a federal level. Let's expand the Oregon Health Plan and bring it back better. As an example of making it better, let's try to address the massive discrepancies in service charges from one hospital to the next. Healthcare is one of the largest line items in many household budgets, and yet there is no transparency about what the different services are going to cost. So we need to fix this. We need to demand transparency from the healthcare entities, and we need to create a distributed funding model so individual patients don't suffer financial disaster when they need to undergo medical procedures. And I am so glad that we can have a conversation that includes the words Oregon Health Plan. And Oregon is a fantastic place to live, isn't it? I think it's safe to say that many of us love living in Oregon because we love the natural environment here. We love the trees, we love the mountains, we love the rivers and ocean. It's beautiful here. But as we've seen in recent years, the natural environment is under threat. We've had devastating wildfires, ice storms, heat waves, and droughts to make the point that we are already seeing the effects of global climate change. It's no longer a question of how we stop it, it's a question of how we mitigate it and how we live with it. So I'll be working with conservation groups to figure out the best way to reduce Oregon's emissions and protect the natural environment. I'll be working with experts to figure out how do we live with the change that is already upon us. We already know that these kinds of changes tend to have the greatest impact on low-income communities. So we need to ensure that we are taking steps to protect the most vulnerable. We must focus on wilderness conservation, forest management, and good stewardship of the land. And that includes enforcing zoning laws and urban growth boundaries to protect farmland. That also includes investigating creative strategies for water conservation and water resource management. Could we use rain barrels in urban areas to decrease demand in the dry season? Could we pump stormwater runoff to more completely refill natural aquifers during the rainy season? I don't have all the answers, but I look forward to working with seasoned professionals to figure out the best strategies for addressing these concerns. But I didn't get into this race just because I want to advocate for my ideals. I also got into this race because I wanted to stand up to the two-term incumbent, Rick Lewis. I've already mentioned I would like to increase funding for public schools and expand the Oregon Health Plan. And the most common objection to policies like these is that they cost money. And that's why it got my attention one day last fall when I learned that Rick Lewis had co-sponsored a Senate bill to reduce Oregon's capital gains tax rate. Now, here's the thing about the capital gains tax. Most people don't pay it. The majority of Oregonians will never pay any capital gains tax ever in their whole entire lives. Capital gains tax is a tax on financial assets that have appreciated in value over time. Things like stocks, bonds, annuities, and trusts. And some of us might pay a little of it, but few of us are going to pay a lot of it. So that's what the capital gains tax is. It is a tax on wealth. And here's the kicker. Do you know what Oregon's capital gains tax rate is currently? I had to look this up. It turns out Oregon's capital gains tax rate is currently the same rate as the tax on all other classes of individual income. Yeah, it's the same, but my opponent wanted to decrease it. So what does this mean? It means that Rick Lewis wants millionaires to pay a lower tax rate than working families. That's what this means. And that is just plain wrong. Progressive taxation is an American value. Throughout the 20th century, we as a society asked more of the people who had the most. We asked less of those who had less, and we offered assistance to those who had the least. And that is as it should be. Unfortunately, as you all know, the federal tax code changes under Bush and Trump have changed all that. They exacerbated the wealth gap, concentrating wealth in the hands of the few at the top while squeezing the middle class and growing the ranks of the poor. And that's what my opponent stands for. The schools are crumbling. We've got rising numbers of homeless people sleeping on the streets, and Rick Lewis wants to give multimillionaires a tax cut. Rick Lewis also co-sponsored this year's Senate Bill 1552, which would take money away from our public schools and instead give those funds to private online schools by creating a mechanism that would evade any sort of certification, review, or approval by local school districts. I'm just going to tell you two more points about my opponent. These are some truly strange times we're living in. In the past 2 years, millions of people worldwide, including nearly 7,000 Oregonians, have died from confirmed cases of the COVID-19 pandemic. Almost 7,000 Oregonians. That's more people than the combined populations of Hubbard and Mount Angel put together. And during those 2 years, while all those people were dying, Rick Lewis has backed at least 7 pieces of legislation related to ending mask mandates and impeaching the governor. As an ex-cop, Lewis tries to position himself as a champion of public safety, but when faced with an opportunity to actually help keep people safe, he would rather remove the head of state instead. And to top it all off, even though this year's legislative session was just a short session, and even though in his own newsletter, Rick Lewis complained that the short session should be focused on minor fixes rather than major policy goals, still, he saw fit to introduce 2 different pieces of legislation aimed at reducing women's access to healthcare services. Rick Lewis co-sponsored Senate Bill 1553, and he was the chief sponsor of this year's House Bill 4042. Both of these pieces of legislation are designed to introduce Texas-style third-party punitive lawsuits into personal healthcare decisions. It's legislation designed to evade judicial review in pursuit of an extremist agenda to limit individual freedom. House Bill 4042 would also compel speech. That's right, the bill Rick Lewis introduced would require doctors to tell their patients specific statements that are not based on medical fact. It's purely based on an extremist anti-choice agenda. Surveys show that this type of legislation is out of step with popular opinion in America. So let's tell Rick Lewis that nobody wants the government getting in the middle of the doctor-patient relationship. My name is Jesse Smith. I'm here to stand up to Rick Lewis, and I'm asking you to stand with me. He is very well funded by corporate donors who max out the contribution limit. I'm just a scrappy upstart, and I need your help. You can donate to my campaign via Act Blue, and my PAC has a donation page too. There's a link and more information on my website at smithfororegon.org. Thank you all for being here. Thanks very much for listening. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm happy to take some questions. I'm happy to take suggestions, corrections. If you guys have any ideas, please feel welcome to shout it out. I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Thanks. Nassim, you have your hand up.
Hi, Jesse. It's good to see you again. It was nice to meet you on Saturday. One thing that I am not hearing either Tina Kotek or you now speak to, which I think is a critical issue that crosses across every spectrum of Oregon, whether you are on the right or left, is addiction. And right now, the latest reports show that Oregon is #1 in the country on the number of people addicted. And excuse me, I have a cold. And so we have got more money going to addiction for the first time, and that's to mental health care. The legislature passed a $500 million bill in October, which was good. Voters passed the decriminalization bill in 2020, of which a portion of that money is supposed to go to addiction counseling. But when you talk with the committees that are working on drug and alcohol abuse, what they say is missing from the agendas in among politicians, including our governor, is the prevention key. How do we prevent this? And so I want to know, I think that the addiction issue crosses over everything you're talking about: homelessness, safety, education. Kids who are growing up in addicted homes clearly aren't going to be able to focus in schools. Lack of counseling in the schools, all of this is, I think it's an issue that you could really penetrate so many populations in our district by talking about what we could get to help our communities, our families live more sound lives, because there's nobody that doesn't know somebody that isn't dealing with this problem.
Very true. Thank you, Nassim, for that question. I appreciate it. The way I look at addiction, I think of it as something that we should treat it as a healthcare issue rather than, for example, criminalizing it. So I think that Oregon has taken the appropriate, is headed in the right direction in terms of how we deal with it as a healthcare issue. I personally have 2 family members who work in addictions recovery up in Washington State. So I hear a lot about this. And I was not aware that we're #1 in Oregon. That's not what we want to be #1 for. I know that a lot of people are currently experiencing addiction to prescription medications. And if we're talking about prevention, then we might want to start looking at the way prescription medications are prescribed. And part of that is going to be shielding doctors from the responses that they get from their patients, because many years ago there was, I don't remember what it was called, there was some sort of empathy in medicine regulation passed that told doctors that if a patient is in pain, then the doctor should prescribe them painkillers. And after that law went through, painkiller use skyrocketed. And then of course they developed Oxycontin and things just got out of hand. So in order for us to cut down on prescribing, we're going to need to also shield prescribers from, frankly, the wrath of their patients when the patients get told, no, you can't have any more of this, you're taking too much of it, we need you to cut down on it. And we need to come up with guidelines for appropriate prescribing, probably look at, it gets complicated because as you know, a lot of the prescription medication gets diverted from, one person has the prescription, they fill it, and then they sell off the pills on the street, right? Or to their friends or whatever. And while we don't want to start sending more people, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, let me help you out here. You don't have to give me a prescription of what you would do right now, because clearly you haven't thought about it too much. And so what I would rather hear from you right now is give me the names and phone numbers, the committees, who I need to talk to so I can inform myself on this critical issue so that I can talk about it with people. And so I'm informed, so I can alert people that we're number one and how that affects job and how that affects schools and how that affects our community. This could be a real passionate issue for you. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Yes, please. If it's awkward to use the chat feature, if you'd like to send me an email after this call, it's are we still recording? Hopefully I won't start getting a lot of spam. It's smith4oregon at gmail.com. So that's all right. I already said it. And I would love to hear from you. Any suggestions that you have. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Jesse? I hope everybody goes to his site and likes his page and spread the word. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry
Lee,
if I wore everybody out.
okay, Lee, I just saw Lee you have your hand up. Lee.
Yeah. Hi, Jesse. I had a question for Tina, but I'm going to give it to you because they ran out of time. And so I was going to tell her that I used to work at a food bank as a policy person and as an outreach person back in California before I moved up here and went to work for Chuck Sheketoff with Oregon Center for Public Policy. And at that time, we were feeding 30,000 people a month in Watsonville, in the valley where they pick the strawberries, the apples, and a lot of the crops that feed America. The farm workers were coming in, and we were feeding a large percentage of our 30,000 clients were farm workers. And before that, I was running a temporary labor agency where homeless people lined up every day at 4 a.m, and I got them out on jobs, and they got cash at the end of the day. And some of them were living in camps right by the labor branch I was at. So homelessness is a big issue for me. And Tina had some good ideas, but this is a question for you, but it's also a research question. I think you may want to go out, and I keep being frustrated because I hear of all these small fixes like we're doing in Salem and figuring out this much housing and that much housing as we have thousands of people in tents. And I'm frustrated because you look back at the Great Depression and the Hoovervilles and people that were homeless then, and they didn't solve all the housing problems. But one thing they did do is they thought big during the Roosevelt era, and they did big programs, and they put thousands of people to work out in the forests and in the fields and in ways that helped begin dealing in a big picture. And I was on an interview of Bud Pierce, a Republican who, is running for office. And he was saying that what we got to do is start thinking big like they did in the Depression and do programs that actually end homelessness instead of putting Band-Aids on it. So I would encourage you to read into the Depression era policy stuff, but do you have any ideas off the top of your head that would be about thinking big on ending homelessness instead of putting Band-Aids on it?
Thanks for that question, Lee. That is a fantastic point. And I realize I only very briefly touched on homelessness in my sort of prepared presentation. And that is because it's such a complex problem, but the solution is fairly simple, right? If somebody's homeless, then what they really need is a home. And so then the question becomes, how are we going to get people into houses? Whether that's the Habitat for Humanity style of building more houses, whether that's what Tina Kotek was talking with, putting people in sort of disused hotels, whether it involves bringing the cost of real estate down so that we can manage the cost of rent so that it's easier for people to stay in a house, whether it involves raising the minimum wage so that people who work can afford a place to live and they don't end up on the street. I can't say that any one of those things would be sufficient, but I love your idea of tackling it the way they did with the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression, of just say, look, we are going to build, what would it would take, I'm not even certain of the numbers, but it would take a tremendous number of new housing units to house Oregon's homeless population. But maybe that's what we need to do, because we don't want our neighbors to have to live like that. And I've been in, I had to go to downtown Salem early in the morning about a year ago, and there were people sleeping in the parking garage. They had no access to restroom facilities. It's not humane. We need to treat our neighbors better than that. So it's a fantastic suggestion. I appreciate it, and I'll do some more research and see what I can come up with. And if you have any suggestions for me, please shout it out or email me. I'd love to talk with you about
Oh,
it.
and also I just wanted to thank you for your presentation. You really covered a lot of ground. You have a lot of passion and a lot of good ideas. Keep up the good work. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Anybody else have a question for Jesse? Okay. Thank you, Jesse. I really appreciate it. And I know it takes a lot to run for office, and I really appreciate you doing it. And Douglas Jenkins is on the call, and you all received an email yesterday about all the volunteer opportunities and different things going on. And Douglas, I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks, Lori. I want to encourage people to look at the email and click on some links and give me some feedback about local infrastructure. Let's have a conversation about local infrastructure real soon, and send me some questions and comments. If you have questions now, I'm happy to have it. Otherwise, it's been a bit of a night, and I'm done.
Anybody have any questions? Okay, I think, I can't wait till we can get together again, and we are talking about maybe an in-person meeting. We'll see how the next couple weeks go and then make that decision. But thank you, everybody. Anybody have any other announcements? Anything else? Okay,
Thank you so much.
good
Appreciate it.
night.
Yeah, have a good day.